Hey, how's it going? Well, the first video in our drawer build got kind of long, so I thought I would break it up into two parts. So let's get back into the action. Well, the box is all screwed together, no glue, as I said before, because this all has to be taken apart so we can pretty it up a little bit. But I've attached the metal runners that go into the slides. And you can see that none of the screws are visible. With the trim on the front, all these screws will be hidden. And I would say, let's go and do a test fit and see if it works. The drawer is put back in the sliders. And it looks like the self-closing works okay. And we have about our 1/2 inch clearance all the way around. Now we're gonna have to pull the drawer completely back out since we know it fits, and tear it apart. We're going to have to sand it. I'm going to hit it with the router a little bit, do some round over, and glue it back together again. Once we do that, then we can start working on the trim and the handle. You might want to check your sliders if it pinches just a little bit going in. Sometimes these self-closing ones can be a little fussy. Just make sure that the two tracks are parallel. And you can adjust them slightly sideways. You can take a little bit off your drawer, or if you have to, you can take some cardboard and you can shim those sliders back out just a little bit. But on to the next step of completing the drawer body. Now that we know the drawer fits and is going to work okay, let's start the disassembly process. I'm going to pull the slides off, and I'm going to mark where this front joins the sides, and then I'm going to pull the front off, and I'll explain why in just a second. The front's off, and what I'm going to do is, using this router with a roundover bit, I'm going to roll the top edges of the sides and the back, and I'm going to roll the inside edge of the front, but only down to where it meets the side. So that's why I marked this front panel piece here. So let me get busy and do that, and then we'll start the further disassembly. Next, we will take this completely apart and do some preliminary sanding on the inside surfaces of the drawer, because it's so much easier to sand when the pieces are separate than trying to sand inside this box. I'll hit it with some 220 grit with the orbital sander, and then we'll be ready to glue all these pieces back up again. All right, we're ready to start the glue up. Okay, let's let that glue dry and we'll get back at it tomorrow. Well, good morning. Looks like we're going to get some more rain today, so I better get sanding on this drawer around the outsides, get it back in the kitchen so that we can start working on trim. While I have the drawer here on the table saw, notice that there are a combination of round and vertical oval and horizontal oval holes in this piece of the track as well as the other piece of the track that's in the cabinet. So that allows you to make some fine adjustments to make your drawer fit the opening. Okay, so now it's time to work on our trim. And I'm going to be using clear poplar, and you see how it will, I don't know if the camera's close enough, but you can see how it will cover up the screws and the opening and everything else like that when I cut this trim. I'll be cutting it out of a piece of 1.5 by 3/4 poplar like this and using the table saw to rip it down to width and to thickness. So the pieces will look like this. And that's because I did not want the full reveal of 3/4 of an inch. I thought that was just too hefty looking for this cabinet. And you can see how it's inset here. And you can see up on the doors that are above the desk how with the glass the reveal is small like this. Just a few eighths of an inch of reveal. So I'm going to match that on these drawers. So the first thing we're going to do is to prepare the two vertical pieces on this drawer and get them fit to the side and to the proper height. So be sure to mark your pieces so you know how they go. This will be for the left side, and I mark that for the up position. And I'm going to use a couple of old credit cards as spacers to get the gaps correct. So we'll set that in there, and then I'll mark the height for our cut. Okay, we're going to use the miter saw to cut this piece of trim. Before I even measure it, I true up one side so that I know it's 90 degrees. And now we have our mark, and I marked it so that the piece will be slightly too long. I want to sneak up on the final measurement. And I found that using another piece of wood behind the piece that I'm cutting eliminates any tear out and ugly cut on the back. So we want to use this backer board to make our cut. So let's trim this, and hopefully it will be too long and I can trim it again for a final measurement. Using a couple old credit cards as spacers, I will position these and get them glued to the face of the drawer. And using some blue tape, I'll hold them in place until the glue dries. By the way, these vertical pieces are typically called stiles, S-T-I-L-E-S, and the horizontal pieces are called rails. So I'm going to do these vertical stiles first, and then once the glue is dry, I will fit the rails in between. All right, well, we're ready now to fit and glue in the two rails, top and bottom. But before we do that, we've got to open this drawer. I have a little piece of bent metal. And now we can't let that drawer close, so I'm going to put some clamps on it so that it can't slam shut by mistake. Okay. So the two stiles that we have glued on not only establish our width for the trim, but the height. So we really don't need the drawer closed to do that fitting. So back to the chop saw and let's get cutting. Well, as the trim dries on the front of that drawer, it's time to start thinking about the handles. And I'll be making my own handles for both the doors and the drawers in the kitchen cabinets. And we decided to go with kind of an exotic type wood. This is called thermally modified roasted maple. And this is dark like walnut, but it has that shimmering maple pattern in it. It's really quite wonderful. It's a little bit expensive, so a 2-foot section is about $30. So I've got about $60 in lumber. And I thought I would mention that when you have some wood there that is of some value and you don't want it to turn into a potato chip or a pretzel on you, you have to sticker it. So I have a number of evenly sized pieces. They're all the same thickness. And we lay our wood horizontally, and what I do is I take a couple of weights and I add it to the top. But basically you want air to move around these pieces of wood as you're storing them, but you also want to hold them as true as possible so that they don't warp. I'll be making some door handles that look like this. Here's a sample that I made up, kind of a guide or a pattern. And you can see this is made by cutting a rectangle of wood and then passing it through the table saw once on each side. This is, by the way, for cabinet doors that we'll be opening, and this will be offset away from the face by 2 little metal collars. I'll show you a picture of that. I paint the collars brown to match, and it's set off from the door. But for the drawers, it's a simple pattern like this, where instead of making one cut on either side, I make both cuts on one side so that we have an L-shaped piece to get your hand under and pull. Because I don't want the drawer handles to be sticking out very far and catch people on legs and briefcases and things like that. And because the wood's relatively expensive, I don't want to waste a lot of it in sawdust. Now, to help with that, I created a little jig, and this jig does a number of things. It helps me fit the pattern so that I know that we're the right size here, and it gives me a repeatable drilling pattern for the 2 holes that are used to secure each of the handles. And it also functions as a jig on the cabinet or drawer itself to show me how far from the edge of the piece of wood the drawer handle needs to be mounted. So one simple jig does at least 3 different things. And I have to admit, when I was in my 20s and early 30s, I never would have had the patience to create a helpful jig like this. That's one of the things you learn as you get older, I guess. But I have so many handles to make that I want to be able to repeat the pattern over and over again without a lot of waste. Okay, so that jig is pretty important. So I'll take a chunk of this maple, this roasted maple like this, and trim it on the table saw into a rectangle, and then I will trim the pattern in it, either a T pattern like this or an L pattern like this. mark the center line, left to right, and I have a center line on my little jig, so I will match those two up. And then, using the holes that are in my jig, I will create some pilot holes. Okay, so that'll show me where to drill out a little bit bigger holes for the screws, and the two holes in my jig will show me where the holes go on the handle. And now we can finally close the drawer again. So just a little touch-up sanding and we'll be ready to put some finish on it. Well, there you have it. Our project's done. On to the next. So get busy, get out into the garage, and make some sawdust. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.